seems like a lot of you are familiar with Rachel, and some of you are familiar with me as well. It would be really great if you could come and sit like in a little closer. Tracy's like, oh. It would, you know, not, yeah,
it's like a punk show. You want people to be
It's my absolute pleasure to welcome you tonight to Malvern Books, this wonderful community of books and literature and friends. My name is Carrie Fountain. I'm a poet and a novelist. Wow. And I know Rachel because she was my student at the Michener Center last year in the first year seminar. I think there might be like a majority of the population of this group might have actually been in that class with us. But when I was thinking about Rachel today, I was thinking about my experience of her as a teacher, that she was just such a warm, thoughtful, careful reader of her classmates' work. In class, her presence was just abundantly, compassionate and super sweet. It wasn't until the middle of the semester that I learned that Rachel had sold her first novel before she entered the Michener Center, before she came to graduate school. Between being accepted into the Michener Center and coming to the Michener Center. And I was just, of course it was not surprising to me because I had already read some of her writing and I knew what a talent she was, but it was so surprising to me that, she seemed like totally unchanged by this. And I just know that if I had published or had sold my first novel the year before I entered graduate school, I think it might have changed my behavior slightly. I might have been slightly unbearable. So I was so doubly impressed by that, and that Rachel has just, it's wonderful to see her book. It's her beautiful book. It's so much attention. But it's also wonderful to see her remain so graceful in the presence of so much success. I think a lot of times teachers of writing spend a lot of time teaching their students how to fail, and this is a great example of someone who has mastered the art of succeeding as well as failing. So Rachel, without further ado, I want to read your bio. For the camera. Rachel Heng's first novel, Suicide Club, available tonight on that table, was named a most anticipated read of 2018 by the Irish Times, Gizmodo, Bustle, NYLON, New Scientist, ELLE, Bitch Media, the Huffington Post, Tour.com, The Millions, and the Rumpus, and will be translated into 10 languages worldwide. Woo! I know! Her short fiction has received a Pushcart Prize Special Mention, Prairie Schooner's Jane Geske Award, we're guessing at that name, and has been published or is forthcoming in Glimmer Train, Tin House, Kenyon Review, Prairie Schooner, and elsewhere. She's been the recipient of grants and fellowships from the Fine Arts Work Center, the National Council of Singapore, and thankfully for all of us here, the Michener Center for Writers, which has brought her to Austin. Without further ado, welcome Rachel Heng.
I feel like we should have beers because I know everyone here, more or less. Thank you for sacrificing an hour on your Saturday night and braving the UT football game traffic to be here. Thank you. So I'm going to read from the third chapter of my novel, and since I think most of you already know what it is, so I'm not going to do the usual spiel and tell you again. But yeah, you've been hearing enough about it over the past. So I'm just going to go straight into it and just kind of read the chapter. And I like to read from it because I think it gives a good sort of introduction into the world of the novel. Anya drew the woolen shawl across her thin shoulders tightly, sinking her chin to breathe in the fading scent of her mother. French lavender and the sea, all mixed up in one sharp whiff. Time was measured in the beating of a mother's mechanical heart. Thud, thud, thud. Space in a number of steps taken to cross the room to retrieve the dried meals that arrived at regular intervals. A mother's heart, rupture-proof, was now visible through a transparent film that had once been her skin, wrapped around a cage of bones. Anya could predict the split-second accuracy, rising and falling of each atrium, each ventricle. Each beat was exactly the same as the last. She watched it fill and squeeze, valves open and close, the ink-colored smart blood flowing thick and steady. Thud, 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 like the footsteps of someone pacing back and forth along the corridor of a big, empty house. The heart would be the last thing to fail. It had the longest working life and had been the newest, most cutting-edge technology. The skin had been the first. Anya had watched as it mottled and shrank away from the bones, great stains of tea brown spreading. Diamond skin, they called it, self-repairing and extra tough. To a point, until her mother reached the end of her predicted enhanced lifespan, and the clinic doors of spotless glass slammed shut forever. So Anya waited, alone with her in this dark room that smelled of stale water, with nowhere to go. When her mother first took to bed, it was not so bad, because at least they could still talk. Back then, she could pretend things were normal, even as her mother's muscles atrophied under the embroidered quilt, and her lungs slowly collapsed into themselves. They passed their time in idle conversation, talking about anything and everything. Music, Sweden, Anya's father. Sometimes, Anya would play the violin for her, the strings pressing cold and cruel into her stiff fingers. She was out of practice, and it showed badly, but her mother no longer pointed out her mistakes. She didn't seem to hear the flat notes or stray beats, only smiled quietly, eyes on the ceiling, hands clasped on her hollow stomach. Anya longed for harsh words, for her mother to point out where she was going wrong and to call her lazy, complacent, to suck the air in through her teeth sharply and stamp her feet, to rap Anya hard on her knuckles, the way she used to. So she started playing badly on purpose, notes slipping and sliding, rhythm askew, watching in quiet desperation for the slightest twitch of displeasure on her mother's face. But it never came. All that remained was that blankness. Anya packed the violin away in its dark velvet case, the shiny metal clasps making gunshot clicks as they snapped shut. When Anya was a girl, a proper girl with ropey limbs and scattered acne, her mother used to take her swimming in the Baltic Sea. They would rise at dawn when the clouds were still asleep and the air was damp with fog. Wrapped in thick bathrobes, they'd cycle the shrub-lined path in the dim light, anticipating each bump and turn before it came. The cloistered morning seemed to go on forever, as if in a dream, but then suddenly, just as their sandaled feet started to go numb in the wind, the path would open up, and there it would be, lapping, metallic, the open sea. They stripped quickly, leaving their bathrobes in a pile, tripping lightly over rough sand and spiky little plants until they reached the edge of the surf. It was better to do it quickly, so they always plunged straight in, pushing through the suffocating chill that pressed from all sides, until the sandy bottom dropped away, and there was nothing left to do but swim. Her mother's limbs shone like ivory in the pink morning light, fearlessly sluicing through cold. They did this every morning of her life, but then they came to New York, and there was nowhere to swim. The day her mother said her last words, they had been talking about their beach. How the sand would rub their feet raw, the steely water blending into sky. How the sharp cold, more heat than cold, never failed to take their bodies by surprise. Her mother wondering if their neighbor, Mr. Anderson, was still watering their plants as he had promised, waiting for the day when they would return to their little white house by the sea. Anya reminding her that Mr. Anderson was long gone, 50 years ago at least, before they even introduced life extension in Sweden. They had embraced it by now, of course, but were still a long way behind America. It was in the middle of this reminiscing that her mother's voice box quit, the muscles clenching around shapeless sounds until they gave up forever. At first, Anya kept talking, filling in with what she imagined her mother would say. It helped that her eyes were still alert, still met her own with a burning light. But eventually, they dimmed. Then her skin started to fade, losing its color and opacity. It grew harder and harder to keep up the one-sided conversation. Now, Anya sat silently in the wooden chair next to her mother's bed, listening to the pumping of her mechanical heart. She told herself that her mother was long gone, her spirit extinguished like a flame in an airless room. She told herself that her mother was no longer there, that the body that remained was an imposter, a shell, a prison. But sometimes, she saw her mother's translucent eyelids twitch, and she wondered, and always, always, there was a relentless thud, thud, thud of the alien heart, a sound that haunted Anya in her sleep, in her dreams. As hard as she tried, she couldn't shake the idea that her mother was still in there, trapped in the dark, unable to speak or see. Thank you.